Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Women's Soccer Show. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Allie.
And we are here for International Break World Cup episode. Let's go. I'm
Did you say World Cup?
Gold Cup. Did I say World Cup?
You said World Cup.
That's so funny because I was about to say I'm totally in like World Cup mode right now.
Yeah.
And I think that it's so exciting. I just am watching these games like, oh, I miss the World Cup. What a time. At this point in my life, most people are annoyed with me referencing the World Cup, referencing like, hey, this one time I was in Australia. And, but for those of you who are listening and followed and contributed to get me there, I've said it a million times, but it'll never be enough. Thank you so much. But we're not here to talk about the World Cup. Now I'm going to be sad because we're not here to talk about the World Cup. But it is international break, and we've got a lot to talk about, a lot of Gold Cup we're going to highlight, and also some England friendlies that we get to discuss. But first and foremost, I think there's been some news out of the NWSL in Kansas City specifically that we just want to jump straight into. And I feel like neither of us love kicking off an episode with like more of a downer of a topic. I don't know would you call this a downer of a topic? I don't know.
I don't know if it's a downer. It's outrageous.
It's an outrageous topic.
It's rage-inducing. So there were rumors coming out on the site formerly known as Twitter, and it got officially discussed that Kansas City are charging an astronomical amount to get a parking pass for the season for on-site parking.
And this is their new stadium. Let's be clear here. This is their brand spanking new stadium. It's going to be the first of its kind, the only women's soccer specific stadium, because no NWSL team or other professional team here in this country has their own stadium. So this is the first of its kind. And obviously that's a big undertaking money wise, but it doesn't warrant these ridiculous parking prices that have been made public this past week.
Yeah, so for the season, a parking pass will cost you $700. Plus,
and that's with the season ticket discount. That's for season ticket holders.
That's for season ticket holders. That doesn't include entry to the games. That's just to park your car. And that is without including the sales tax, the fee from the site that you buy the parking from, plus there's a credit card processing fee, but you can't pay with any other form of payment other than a credit card. So you have to pay with a credit card and pay this fee. So it totals out at $816.93 for a parking pass. That's like an additional...
I did the math. I got you here. It's $50 even without any fees. But then with all the fees, the taxes, etc., you're paying $63 a game to park your car. Again, this is just parking alone. And I mean, there's so many elements to this. Let's just get all the news out of the way first, and then we'll drop into it. Local news has been covering this, as well as, you know, everybody on Twitter, who, thank you to all of the Kansas City fans who are posting this, and all of the Kansas City season ticket holders who, they're the only ones who this was available to right now. So the only reason we have this information is because, you know, Kansas City season ticket holders are getting emails saying, hey, you can go on this site on Monday and buy your season parking pass. And that's why this was made public, is because they're screenshotting it and they're sharing it and being like, oh my God, this is how much we're paying, just so everybody knows. So local news that's been covering it, because this will be the first time the stadium is in use, has also reported that, quote, on-site parking will be minimal. And amid the outrage, Kansas City Current posted one of the most useless Twitter threads I've maybe ever seen in my life. They posted a whole thread that's like, hey, here's 7 ways to get to the stadium. Don't worry, there's tons of modes of transportation. Let's just take you through these quickly. First, on-site parking. Great, we just talked about that. That's incredibly expensive. So there's some accessibility access with that. The streetcar, which, from what I can tell, only spans about 2 miles outside of the stadium. So you're going to have to like go into downtown or whatever part the streetcar picks up from, and then park your car, which is probably still going to cost money, and then hop on the streetcar. Time, money, not that easy. 3, off-site parking. Okay, that's the same thing that you just mentioned about the streetcar. 4, walk. 5, bike. 6, bus. 7, rideshare. Okay, we've talked a lot about accessibility in this game, specifically within the WSL, because ticket prices in the WSL started to rise. And I think this is a great moment for us to talk about accessibility here within the United States. And I have a gripe with this for a lot of reasons. First, of course, is the price is astronomical. You're literally pricing out probably a good chunk of your fans. Second of all, let's talk literal physical accessibility for disabled fans. And anybody who has somebody in their life who is affected by physical disability understands that if on-site parking is limited, that pretty much translates to disabled fans probably aren't attending, can't come, you've made it really hard for them. That's my other big gripe with this. And when we first saw where this stadium was being built, it's kind of like with the Boston Stadium. We saw where what the plans are for the Boston Stadium, and immediately it's like, hey, red flag here. How are people going to get there without a car? Or are you going to have really affordable parking? What's going on here? And this is just a strike number 100 against the Kansas City front office and owners and just the organization and how they're handling everything. They had to have known from the start how much this was going to cost and thus how they were going to try to make back their money. And it seems like baked into that plan of making back your money was just bleeding your season ticket holders and fans for everything that they are worth. And that's not okay. This game is now completely inaccessible to probably 80% of people.
So now let's talk about some fun stuff. Let's talk about some internationals and the tournament I'm so excited by, which is the Premier Gold Cup. And there has been some insane matches going on in this tournament. The results have been crazy, phenomenal, and I'm so excited. So let's get into it.
So we are recording this before Tuesday's game, so we don't have those results for you, but let's get into just where we are in general in the tournament right now. Today, Wednesday, is the final day of group stage games. Today will be Group C. Their final 2 games of the group stage will happen today, and then the quarterfinals are Saturday and Sunday. So we will be covering the quarterfinals on next week's episode, which, I mean, I'm already insanely excited for. So today what we're going to do, we're going to talk about 2 topics. First and foremost, we, of course, are going to talk USA versus Mexico, a game that happened Monday night. That would be the 3rd and final group stage game for the U.S. and for Mexico. But before we do that, we're going to talk Brazil versus Colombia. We're heading to Group B first, which frankly is arguably the group of death in this tournament. It's got Brazil, Colombia, Puerto Rico, and Panama. And for those of you who remember the World Cup referenced to earlier in this episode, Panama and Brazil were in the same group in the World Cup. So it's just a fun full circle all around. Now, the second of the 3 group games saw Brazil take on Colombia, and we just can't not cover this matchup when it happens, right? So let's get into it.
Let's get into it. So we're going to talk briefly about, because we're so loving still the World Cup, we're going to talk about the teams and how they did in the last World Cup to see how this matchup is faring, because these 2 teams had very different World Cups, shall we say.
Yeah, I feel like it's nice, especially since the World Cup was so recent and these teams were both very talked about for different reasons in the World Cup. They haven't had many games since. It's nice to get a background of like, okay, what's happened since the World Cup coming into this matchup. So let's start there and then we'll get right into the game.
So Brazil, for those that don't remember, were the early favourites. They were dark horses for the World Cup. Had a smashing game against Panama, won it 4-0. They then lost narrowly to France 2-1 and then tied 0-0 with Jamaica, which they needed the win to advance. But because Jamaica had already drawn with France, they couldn't do it, and that pushed Jamaica through. Long-time coach Pia Santa got the boot, and they've now got new coach Arthur Elias.
And we've talked about Arthur Elias before, but just a quick recap if you don't remember, he's had a very long coaching career. He's been coaching since 2009, and specifically he's been coaching in the women's game since 2009, which I think is a really important note. But this will be his first international bout. And I think even more importantly, or equally importantly, I'll say, to having spent his coaching career in the women's club game, he specifically spent his coaching career until now in the women's club football game in Brazil. And I really love that about this move. He, because of how much time he spent in that game in Brazil specifically, what Pia Sundhage did so well is recruit, and they need to maintain that. So for him to have the depth of knowledge from spending time in Brazil in the club game, it's so important because he now knows what players, hey, maybe this fringe player, we can bring her into camp. Maybe she'll add something. I love that element that he can bring to Brazil. But since the World Cup and since Pia Sundhage's firing and Elias taking control at the helm, he's only been the head coach for 5 games before this Gold Cup happened. They played Canada twice, they played Japan twice, and Nicaragua once. And so it's still really like untested territory here when we look at Brazil with this new head coach.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's what the exciting part is to see now this is the big stage. This is what they've got to go up against. And then you look at their counterparts in Colombia, again, cover the World Cup. They were in a group with Germany, Morocco, and South Korea. They had 2 wins and 1 loss. So their loss was against Morocco, which allowed Morocco to advance. And Germany and South Korea drew, which was
You've got to remember that, Ali.
That was
You've got to remember that.
I do. The sad thing about that one is, my everlasting memory is of the sad face of Pop because they gave her player of the match in that Germany-South Korea game. And they'd been knocked out, so she looks so annoyed in this picture.
I was on the plane to Australia when that happened, and our wonderful Tim came on and did that episode with you, Ali. And I just remember landing, turning my phone on and seeing the results and being like, what did I miss?
Yeah, that was a strange time to be on a plane, my friend.
But back to Colombia. They really were the World Cup darlings. After they exited the group stage, they beat Jamaica in the round of 16, and then they lost to England in the quarterfinals 2-1, and that was their exit. The best the Colombian team has ever done in the World Cup, though, so it was a really strong performance from Colombia. However, even despite the strong performance, some news that I think didn't get as many headlines, and frankly, I don't even know if we covered it, Ali, because it was so tucked away underneath all of the other headlines coming out of the end of the World Cup. The Colombia coach stepped away from his role after the World Cup. Nelson Abadia stepped away from his role. There's so much news that I was really uncovering. Before the World Cup, he was suspended for the first 2 games of the World Cup, and the reasons behind that are still very murky. It was reported that the reason for his absence was an infringement from the FIFA World Cup in 2015, but that was more than 1 World Cup ago and like 8 years ago. And then it was like kind of speculated that maybe another incident in 2022 Copa America played into that. But either way, just very weird stuff. He was suspended for 2 games, and then also him stepping away from the helm of the head coaching job. Also murky, not a lot of reasons given. So kind of weird stuff around here. But nevertheless, the head coach who took over, Angela Marsiglia, was Abadia's assistant and was the one who was coaching them on the sideline during the World Cup when he was serving his suspension. So somebody that the players are familiar with, at least.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's, again, exciting to see under this new management, this new turn of where they can go, because both teams are on, I think, a turn for the better, and they're on this rise and this peak. And now we're going to finally see how they go head to head. Well, we did see how they went head to head.
We did. Yeah, I think that's what's so exciting about this is we're watching these teams build and see where they can go. Brazil, disappointing in the World Cup. We thought that they were going to do better. We want to see if they can turn it around. Colombia, such darlings of this past tournament. We want to see how they continue to hopefully build on that momentum. And this game specifically, let's get into it. I mean, Brazil took it 1-0, and they absolutely deserved that scoreline. And I'll just kick it off by saying this. I think the feeling around Colombia after the World Cup, I think we all might have been left with a feeling about how good they were that was, frankly, probably just a little bigger and better than how they actually played in the World Cup. They were very rightfully the darlings of the tournament, and they were so much fun to watch. And specifically, of course, Linda Caicedo became a household name overnight, which is so wonderful to see. But I think it's important to remember that this is still a program that's very much on the rise. The quarterfinals was their best ever result in a World Cup, and they're not a powerhouse yet. And I think this game against Brazil was a really solid indication, and maybe I'll just say a solid reminder of that. Like, they're still on their way there, but they have a lot of work to do. And specifically, I think what we saw in this game was a mental lapse that was on par and equivalent to exactly what we saw when they played England in the quarterfinals of the World Cup and they got knocked out. When Colombia went down in this game, and they went down early, which we'll come on to, they lost their heads and they just got physical. And it felt like instead of focusing on their own game, they just leaned into the physicality, and Brazil continued to keep their cool. And from then on, it was very clear that Colombia were not going to crawl back into this game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will say that this game felt more than a 1-0. Like, when I was watching it back, I was expecting there to be more goals. I genuinely was. Because, like I said, I watched it on replay. It just, the intensity that both teams had, I honestly...
It was a physical match.
Yeah.
It really felt like a knockout round. It didn't feel like a group stage. It was intense.
No, not at all. Absolutely. I thought Brazil could probably have capitalised on Colombia's mistakes a little bit more. Because that's what, as you said, the first goal was a mistake from the keeper, who did not clear very well with her feet.
Yeah, I'll say across the board, neither goalkeeper in this game had a good game with their feet. Luciana of Brazil and Geraldo of Colombia. Geraldo's mistake was Brazil made her pay for it, and that's how they got the goal. Terrible clearance. Brazil capitalizes. That's the one goal that leads to the 1-0 win for Brazil. But on the other end, Luciana of Brazil had some very shaky moments as well with her feet. And just across the board here, if they're giving either team something to work on, it's go take your keeper and have her do touches with her feet on the ball, because that was terrifying to watch on both ends. But I'd agree. They didn't. Brazil could have capitalized more, even more than they did.
So the biggest story of this Colombia was the fact that they had no shots on target.
That's a big stat, and I don't even know that we even needed to look at the stats to know that. I mean, if we're watching the game, they could advance the ball, they could possess, they actually won possession statistics. You know, they technically were on the ball more, but it didn't even feel like that, because of all of the opportunities created, Brazil were making all of the dangerous and threatening chances, and Colombia simply could not get a shot on target. Luciana hardly even touched the ball with her hands. It was all her feet.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, yeah, I think there's so much for Colombia to work on.
Yeah, but I would agree, and we can talk about Colombia, but I actually think the story that the picture that this paints equally about Colombia and equally about Brazil, because Brazil, the reason we gave that all of that background about the World Cup is because going into the World Cup, they were favorites, because you look at their offense and their midfield and their goal scores, and you're like, every single one of these players can score a goal, 2, even 3, any single game. And it was wild. And that's exactly what they were focused on in the World Cup. And their defense, they went into that World Cup essentially as one of those teams that were like, we're just going to score more than you. It doesn't matter if you score, we're going to score more than you. And it was to their detriment. And I think in this game, what we saw is a Brazil that is now focused on organized defending, team defending in that shape, and then allowing that free-flowing Brazilian offense. But that organized defense that we haven't really seen from Brazil seems to be what they're focused on. And I credit them for how they were able to really shut down Colombia that has, you know, this is a team with Usme, Caicedo, like, those two players alone were very much shut down by this Brazilian defense. And it's really wonderful to see them focusing on that. And I think that's a wonderful trend. If you get a Brazil with the offensive threats that they have, and then you add this structure that we just saw on defense, oh my goodness. And I'll remind everybody that Dabinha, Aure Borges, and Jace all came off the bench in like the 65th minute. So this was a Brazil that for most of the game didn't even have those three as offensive threats. It was a defensive masterpiece from them.
I was going to say, the Brazil bench was stacked. Was stacked. And the fact they didn't even bring them on until like halfway through the second half, that's how well Brazil was doing. And that's what is exciting. It genuinely is exciting. I think in general, South American football is starting to get the investment that we've been crying out for and begging for, and we're starting to see that with their players. And that's why competitions like the Gold Cup is so exciting, because it allows people that don't get to see the South American football as much, because especially over here in Europe, you might occasionally get like Brazil will come play England for a friendly or thing, but you don't actually get to see them go toe to toe, which for me was the most exciting part.
And that, like, I absolutely love that we now have a South American rivalry, a full women's soccer, these two nations. And now these are games that we're all going to look forward to across the world. And that's what putting this tournament together, that's what the Gold Cup and continuing to have these nations in the Americas play each other more and more and more, that's what it's going to develop and keep developing. And this has just been so much fun. All right, but we're not done yet with the Gold Cup. We are going to get into the third group game for Group A, USA versus Mexico.
So some might say a shock win, but Mexico win 2-0 and advance first out of Group A with 7 points. What a game. What a game.
I mean, let's set the whole scene. Yeah, Mexico advanced first with 7 points. The US advanced in second place with 6 points out of Group A. Quarter-final matchups are totally dependent on both Group B and Group C results, because there's only 3 groups, the top 2 third-place finishers will also advance, so we really have to wait for all group stages to be done to see how this is going to shake out. But the point is, Mexico, with this win, advanced over the U.S. This is the first time in 14 years that Mexico beat the U.S. The previous time was 2010, and if you listen to the U.S. broadcast, you probably remember them saying that about 10, 12, 15 times, many, many, many times.
You know what? Let's talk about the positive first. And unfortunately for Sarah, talking about the positive means we have to start with Mexico.
This is really the theme of this episode, Allie, isn't it? It's like, we're really going to throw it back to the World Cup right now. Because I'm truly being like put back. Unfortunately, Sarah doesn't want to talk about this, but we're going to talk about this anyways for the US. We're being put back into the World Cup right now.
We basically are, but like I said, let's start with the positive and then we can talk about the negative, which is the US. But let's talk about Mexico, because I think the most important thing to say, this is why we say you have to grow your domestic league, because Mexico has shown us with La Liga MX, they have showed up and they're showing up and constantly developing. And it shows how quickly this league has developed with the talent that they've brought in. And it's all homegrown talent. They've got a few internationals there, but it's mainly Mexican players in the Mexican league. And look at this result and look at this match, and you can see why we keep banging on about investment in domestic leagues, because look at what's happened.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That is the highlight coming out of this win for Mexico. Is the last time these two teams played was 2 years ago. It was 2022. And La Liga MX from 2020 to 2022, in those 2 years, had already grown a lot. But specifically in the past 2 years, it's been like exponential. And I think a lot of people were kind of anticipating this game as being a big one. We mentioned before, this is a rivalry in the men's game. It hasn't really been one in the women's game, but sometimes that can carry over. And it was really fun to see Snapdragon Stadium in San Diego packed to the brim. It seemed like there were more Mexican fans than U.S. fans, and that made for a really fun environment. But yeah, this is really like the headline, and we've seen this. This isn't the first country we've seen this in. We saw it in Spain. We're seeing it in Portugal. We're seeing it in Italy. Like, it's not new news that when you invest in the domestic league, you do reap the benefits across the board. And that's what we're seeing here for Mexico. And frankly, this is the best game I think I've ever seen this Mexican side play. In all of the times I've watched them in CONCACAF, this is the best I think I have ever seen them play. They were absolutely relentless. They were not scared. They came out to win, and they tucked away an early goal from a really unfortunate play, but we're not going to talk about that. But the point was that once they scored, once they went up 1-0, they didn't sit back. They didn't sit back and protect the lead. They continued with the high press. They did not take their foot off of the gas. And they came to win. And that last goal in injury time at the end of the game to seal it 2-0 was a stunner. It was an absolute beauty.
I think that speaks a lot to the Mexican team in the fact that they go up 1-0 and they can still block out the US, who do have some insane strikers on them. Like Morgan was playing, and she's fearless for the US, and they could still block all of that out and get another goal in injury time to salt in the wound.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come on to the U.S. because there's so much even in that sentence that I want to reply to. But to stay on Mexico, I think the final thing, and it was talked about on the U.S. broadcast, was their high press. It was too much for the U.S. to handle. In the past 2 games of this tournament, the U.S., I think, have shown really solid development since the World Cup. And they've also shown that they can break down a low block. Playing against the Dominican Republic, winning 5-0. That was a low block. Played against Argentina, won 4-0. That was a low block. This wasn't. And so it was a new challenge for the U.S., and they did not meet it. And what Mexico did with their high press, what the U.S. like to do is they like to get that ball into the center midfield. They like to possess it and distribute out wide. They like to get their outside backs high so we can kick it wide, and then we can play with numbers forward. And Mexico shut down the pass into the center midfield, and they pushed their wingers so high that it forced the U.S. outside backs to have to stay back and not join the attack as much as they wanted to. And it was brilliant, and the U.S. had no answers for it. And it wasn't just, I mean, we'll come on to the U.S. The U.S., they had no answers for it. It was an absolutely brilliant game plan for Mexico, but I think even more importantly, it was perfectly executed. They deserved that win. They deserved that 2-0. It could have been 2-0 by the end of the first half with what was happening. All credit to them, absolutely.
Yeah, nothing more to say on that. It's like Mexico was showing why we've been banging on about the league so much, and I'm excited. I'm excited to see what they can do next, because they've been thrilling in this tournament. Been thrilling.
Yeah, they really have. Should we spend a moment on the United States? And I mean a moment, because I do have a lot to say, but I'm going to summarize it here at the top by saying that I have to say, by the end of this game, I do feel like I was a little bit caught between my emotions of course, wanting us to win. This is a tournament. You want to win. You want to advance first. And also knowing that this is about the bigger picture and doing the work that was not done before 2023 in finding what works, finding the personnel. This is a transition period, and we need to learn a lot. And to say the very least, out of this game, you got a lot of learnings. You got a lot of learnings. And so when you take a step back like that, like this tournament, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. And so good, go get those learnings. That being said, that doesn't mean that there aren't things that need to be fixed and things that need to be pointed out. But I think that they do need to all fall under the umbrella of, obviously, this is the U.S. Women's National Team. Obviously, they want to win every game. And sometimes a little kick in the butt is what you need. And, I just think that's evident. Between the first and the second game, there were 10 changes in the starting lineup. Between the second and the third game, there were 7 changes in the lineup. And so that if that doesn't tell you what the goal here is, then I don't know what else does, right? But this lineup, it really was, I think, the oldest squad that we fielded so far in this tournament. And it showed in not a great way.
Yeah, I'm having a look at the lineup now, and I can't really see where your pace is coming from, apart from maybe Rodman. Williams was on for a bit, so I can see maybe that. But again, Williams is one of the older players she's still pacey, but
when you talk about pace, I feel like we'll start at the center back, right? So Sauerbrunn Dahlkemper pairing. This was the center back pairing that won the 2019 World Cup, but that was 5 years ago, and they had Julie Ertz in front of them, and it just simply doesn't work anymore. We really missed Naomi Girma at the back. Previously the Davidson Girma pairing, they were also able to contribute to the U.S. through distribution and contribute to them offensively, which we really didn't see out of Sauerbrunn and Dahlkemper. But we talk about Sauerbrunn and Dahlkemper, like we're not here to talk anything bad about Becky, but there's not a lot of pace there, and that's part of what happened in Mexico's first goal. And they came out in a 4-3-3, and at halftime they switched into this 4-2-2-2, kind of like a box up the middle, which I personally love, and they've been playing really well in for the past 2 games. In the first half, that's what I wanted to see. I was like, you need to switch into a 4-2-2-2, because listen, that 4-3-3, how many times are we going to bang our head against a wall? It didn't work in the World Cup. You don't have the personnel to play a singular number 6. You need the double 6. You need the double pivot. And so when we switched to that, I liked that we went that way. I thought in terms of it got better a little bit. It got a little bit better. It got a little bit better. It didn't get a lot better. Look, there's some personnel stuff that I disagree with. I thought I would rather have seen Rodman come out than Smith at halftime, but I think that maybe that's not necessarily important here. I think that the bigger picture stuff is what's more important. And like I said, what we saw, other than the formation stuff in terms of figuring out what really works and what doesn't for the U.S., is overarchingly, the young players are the ones that really need to be on the field right now. Corbin Albert came on in the middle of the second half. She was so missed. She's been one of our most dynamic midfielders, completing more passes than most. Jaden Shaw, an absolute star. Like we knew that specifically, but there was a moment in this game where it was just like calling for Jaden Shaw to come in. And then defensively, Fox and Niswanger, 2 very young outside backs. I would have loved to see them at the outside back and throw Dunn into that box. I know we have to stop calling for Dunn in the midfield because it's never going to happen. But like, if you're going to play that box, allow those 2 young outside backs with speed to run those wings and throw Dunn in the midfield. And I think that's the big story. That's the big learning that came out of this game. People are going to say they look really frantic in the second half, and it just, I think that that's almost like a secondary point, frankly, because we just mentioned how many changes did they make to the lineup? Of course it's going to be a little frantic. And quite frankly, like, yes, there is a difference between you go down and you're frantic, or you go down and then you play with a sense of urgency, but it's still organized. But that's okay. Like, it'll get there. I think the step from seeing a U.S. team maybe like 2 years ago go down and then it looked like they had no fight, versus now a team that they look frantic. They have some fight. They don't know where to put it yet. They don't know how to organize themselves yet. Right. But there was energy there. So that much didn't so much bother me. I think, like I said, this was a learnings game, and they deserved the 2-0 loss. They really did. We did. I don't abandon them in the loss.
I'm going to finish by quoting the person in the fan park in Australia, which is Sonnet is the answer. Because Sonnet has been the answer all along.
Let's go around the world, around the world. International edition.
I thought you'd do that.
I love doing that.
So over to the Asian Olympic qualifiers. We are in the final stages of the Olympic qualifiers for the Asian federations. Australia versus Uzbekistan and Japan versus North Korea. Those are your semi-finalists. First leg was played on Friday, with Australia winning comfortably 3-0. Japan versus Korea was a much tighter game, resulting in a 0-0 draw. The second leg will be taking place on Wednesday when this podcast drops.
Over to Nations League, everybody's favorite tournament to qualify for the Olympics. Friday saw the semifinals of the Nation League Group A take place. Spain took down the Netherlands 3-0, whereas France beat Germany 2-1. The final takes place on Wednesday, the 28th. The more interesting match, however, is the third place playoff game. As France already have an Olympic place as hosts, the final spot will be awarded to either Germany or the Netherlands, since they will be facing each other in that third place game.
And finally, the Oceanic qualification. We have the third team to qualify for Paris 2024, representing the Oceanic region. New Zealand beat fierce competition to win over the Solomon Islands to claim their spot. It was, in fact, an emphatic win, 11 goals to their opponents' 1.
Have you checked out Total Football Analysis yet? TotalFootballAnalysis.com provides researched analysis on loads of football, including the women's game. Want all the stats in one place instead of drowning in a mountain of tabs? Want to explore key matchups and the tactics from both teams? Total Football Analysis provides the stats and analysis to help you learn more about the beautiful game. We have a special discount for listeners of the Women's Soccer Show. At checkout, type WOSO10 to get a full year for just €10. That's €40 of the yearly subscription. Head over to TotalFootballAnalysis.com and type WOSO10 at checkout.
Over to England. Do not worry, my England fans. We did not forget. And while these friendlies don't necessarily have as much oomph and weight, it's always a blast to talk England, to watch this team play, to see what Sarina Wiegman has got going on. And England took on Austria in their first friendly of this international window. England took down Austria 7-2, and we're going to talk about both of these teams. And I think what we're most excited to talk about, weirdly, is Austria. So quickly, before we get into that, let's talk England. Allie, what did you make of your Lionesses' performance here?
You know, I can't say it was a bad performance. You know, knocking 7 goals in is something that we can only be hoping that England could be doing. What I really liked, and the thing I was really excited about, is that Sarina did what I was hoping she would do, which she experimented a little bit. Because this is a friendly, because this has no bearing on any future qualification for anything. You know, we had Hannah Hampton in goal instead of Merps. You know, we had Letitia getting a senior start. We had Esme Morgan getting a senior start. We had Grace Clinton coming on in the midfield and getting her first international goal. You know,
so happy to see that. Oh my God, because what a season she's having. She deserves that.
Exactly. So it was great to see Sarina sort of letting go of that tight lineup she normally has and being like, you know what, this is the time to see who I'm going to be taking to the Euros to and beyond, because there are going to be some players. Like, we didn't see Lucy Bronze at all during that game, which allowed for Niamh Charles to have more freedom, along with see the Greenwood pairing. Like, that's the thing. It was exciting as an England fan to see what the potential future could be. I will take that. And you know what? We got banging goals for fun. Russo scored in the first 3 minutes. And scored quite a nice goal in the first 3 minutes. You know, I said Clinton got her first senior goal. Mido got 2 goals. Daly got a goal in injury time. Like, it was fun to see the goal scorers that we've been waiting for, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to look at it, because you can look at a scoreline and be like, how really you let in 2 goals? But that's not the point. The point here is that this is a friendly. This is literally the time for Sarina to work out what she wants her squad to be for next year. And it's really nice to see the different combinations. This is their moment to start developing more connections between players who maybe haven't played together as much. So I really love that. Anything else on England before we move on to Austria?
I just want to say a big shout out to Jess Carter for giving the most beautiful little flick on. If you've not seen that goal, I'm going to guarantee that Monday after, kids were trying to recreate that goal like they were with the Russo back heel against Sweden, because it was just the most beautiful little flick on into her. But again, it was great to see Ruben Moy getting game time. I think that was the big thing for me, was the experimentation was what England had been needing, and that freshening up. So yeah, that for me was the big thing for England. Defensively, a little dicey, but that's to be expected, because you're playing with a goalkeeper you don't really play with and a back line, you know. haven't quite cemented, but that's the point of these friendlies.
I agree. I completely agree. So now let's get on to Austria, because Austria is a nation that, while they didn't qualify for the most recent World Cup, they have put up some very strong performances of recent, specifically in Nations League. I mean, they only lost to France 1-0. They beat Portugal twice. They beat Norway, and now a smacking defeat against England. And granted, this is a World Cup finalist. This is the team that got second place in the world. So that is different than playing a Norway, a France, a Portugal.
Did that choke you to say?
A little, but it wasn't first in the world, so it's okay. Do you know what? Are the US still ranked number 1 in the world according to FIFA, even though...
No, was it Sweden last rankings?
I think it was at the last rankings. Oh, you're going to hate this. Spain are number 1. The US are right behind them at number 2. Then France, then England, and then Sweden.
How?
Anyways, besides the point, I think this scoreline was a little shocking on behalf of Austria. So, Allie, as somebody who watched that game, specifically watching the Lionesses, I'm sure you saw a lot of what was going on and going wrong with Austria. So let's talk through some of that.
Yeah, because it felt to me it's like such a regression because, I mean, yes, they didn't get into the World Cup, but if we look at the Austria of the Euros, they barely lost to England in the opening game. It was a 1-0 Beth Mead special. And then they went on really well in the group. They qualified. They then got into the quarters and gave the Netherlands a really strong game in the around the 16 quarters. Anyway, they played the Netherlands and it was a really strong game, and we thought that they were going to maybe take them on. Like it was they played such a low block, really hard to break down defensive football, and we thought that was their future and that was how they were going to progress and everything else. And you look at the last outings against England specifically, it was 1-0, 1-0, 2-0 all to England, but they're not rugby scores. They were hard fought, defensively strong games, and for them to lose 7-2 is such a regression for this team really that was coming up.
It is a team that, I mean, look, you look across their lineup and every single one of these starters plays in a huge league in the world. I mean, we'll start, of course, with the very well-known Manuela Zinsberger. Of course, the starting or previously starting goalkeeper for Arsenal. You've got Barbara Dunst. She plays for Eintracht Frankfurt in the Frauen Bundesliga. I mean, this is a team that, when you look at the individual talent, you don't expect this scoreline. And granted, of course, it's not England, but this is getting close to a rugby score.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it concerns me because I thought the point, and also they were in the same Group A of Nations League, meaning the top tier qualifiers of Nations League. So they had something. They were seeded. They had something going on, and clearly something went wrong. Their back line, both wingers made one successful tackle in that game. Entire game. One played for 63 minutes and one played the entire game. And they made one successful tackle in that game. That's not good enough. That is poor. That
it doesn't take a genius to look at this scoreline and be like, I think that their defense broke down. But I think the bigger question that you're addressing here is what needs to be asked. And I don't think either of us have the answer for this, is why the backslide? Why the downfall? Why are you suddenly, on a downward trajectory when previous to this, it's really did look for a while like they were just on a very slow but steady linear upward trajectory?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to put the blame on Zinsberger. I don't put the blame on Zinsberger, but there might be a little bit in the fact that she's had such a knock in confidence domestically. She's sort of lost her starting position for now to another goalkeeper. They brought in an emergency goalkeeper, so maybe that's playing into there. But at the same time, I think there's probably a lack of funding. It's not going there. And a lack of time together, because yes, we talked about the fact that they all play in big European leagues, but they don't play in the same European leagues. And when you look at
Right. And they don't play in Austria.
And they don't play in Austria. And when you look at England, the team that they played, you look at, like, I'd say 90% of those players play in the WSL, and they play in the same league, and they play against each other all the time, and they know each other, like that. It feels like to me that teams like the Austrian team, they have to split off and they have to go to these different leagues because the Austrian league does not have the funding to give them the career that they deserve. So when they come back, they literally get the 2 weeks here, the 3 weeks there, the whatever training, and that is just a missing link. And until you give them the funding, we're going to just keep seeing them backsliding, and they're going to go into the lower leagues, and they're not going to be seeded anymore, and that's going to be the end of some quite promising international careers, let's be honest, because you look at the players they do have, and it makes me sad. More than anything, it makes me sad.
It always comes back to funding, doesn't it?
Yep.
It always comes full circle back to funding. All right, and that is it for us today in our international episode. I'll call this our international episode because it includes the, friendlies and FIFA window over there on the other side of the world. But for us here in the Western Hemisphere, if you will, in the Americas, we're staying in international. And next week, we are covering the quarterfinals of the Gold Cup. I am very, very excited, Allie. And that is it for us here at the Women's Soccer Show. Of course, head over to our Patreon. You can catch a bunch of different segments on various topics that I can't remember right now, but they're all very interesting. So head on over to that. That's patreon.com/TheWoso Show. And of course, you can follow us on socials at the same handle, The Woso Show. And for us here at the Women's Soccer Show, I've been Sarah.
And I've been Ali.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
This podcast was edited by Monkey Hill Media. Visit monkeyhillmedia.com for more information.